The sound my body made as it collided with the marble floor of Beverly Hills was muffled, a dull thud that seemed to be swallowed by the luxury of the ballroom. For an instant, time froze. The echo of laughter, the clinking of crystal, and the soft melody of the string quartet vanished, giving way to a heavy, awkward silence, a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. I lay there, fallen, the aching bones of a 72-year-old woman protesting against the cold hardness of the polished stone, and the only thing I could see were the shoes. Expensive shoes, designer shoes, shoes that cost more than I earned in an entire year of sewing to support the man who now sat at the head table, paralyzed. I slowly raised my gaze, past the fine fabrics of trousers and dresses, until I met the face of my son, Daniel. He didn't move. His eyes, which I once rocked to sleep, were wide, fixed on me, but his body was petrified with shame. Beside him, Isabella, his fiancée, the architect of my humiliation, had a tiny, almost imperceptible smile on her red lips. It was a smile of victory, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. She had pulled the chair, a quick, deliberate gesture, at the exact second my tired body was preparing to rest. No one seemed to notice the act itself, only the clumsy consequence. The old mother, the fish out of water, collapsing amidst the opulence. The scent of the white gardenias in the table arrangements mingled with the smell of dust from the floor, and I tasted the bitter taste of abandonment in my mouth. In that moment, on the floor, with the weight of hundreds of stares upon me and my heart shattered by the inertia of my own son, something changed. The pain that pierced me was not just physical. It was the pain of decades of invisible sacrifices, of a love that had become a burden to him. And in that deafening silence, as shame burned my face, I did not plan revenge. I planned my liberation. If you love Jesus and believe this story has something to teach us, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes of Stories of Healing and Wisdom. Your subscription is an act of faith in your own transformation. I ask you to join our community of souls who have gone through something similar. The silence that followed my fall was a living creature. It crept across the ballroom, coiling around the ankles of the guests, suffocating conversations and making everyone feel complicit in my shame. No one moved. It was as if I were a museum piece that had tumbled from its pedestal, and etiquette demanded that everyone just watch, shocked, unsure if they were allowed to touch. I saw faces turning away, gazes shifting to the crystal chandeliers as if they were suddenly fascinated by them. I heard the murmuring begin, a low, venomous hum that spread from table to table, the words, "his mother," so simple, "what a situation," floating in the air like mold spores. My son, Daniel, remained a statue. His fists were clenched on the white linen tablecloth, his knuckles white, a perfect picture of conflict and impotence. He was trapped between two worlds, the filial loyalty he should feel for me and the new alliance he had sealed with Isabella, the woman whose power both intimidated and seduced him. And she, sitting with a regal posture, observed the scene with an almost scientific interest, as if analyzing the reaction of an insect after tearing off its wings. Heat rose up my neck and flooded my face, a tide of humiliation so intense I could barely breathe. Every second I remained on the floor was a new layer of indignity solidifying upon my soul. My hip throbbed, but the physical pain was a distant echo of the agony tearing at my chest. I was a living reminder of the past he wanted to erase, a speck of dust on his golden canvas. And there, fallen at his feet, I had never felt so disposable. It was then that the spell was broken, not by my son's hand, but by the sound of hurried, determined steps against the marble. A young woman, wearing the impeccable black and white uniform of the catering staff, emerged from the midst of the paralyzed guests. Her face was young, with strong features and deep, dark eyes that did not hold the empty pity I saw in the others, but something much rarer, recognition. She knelt beside me, completely ignoring the dozens of stares from Beverly Hills high society. Her presence was a small island of humanity in an ocean of indifference. "Ma'am, are you all right? Let me help you," she said, in a soft Spanish, her voice a balm to my wounded soul. Her hands, as they took mine, were not soft and manicured like Isabella's. They were a worker's hands, with small calluses on the palms, hands that knew the weight of effort, just like mine. In that instant, feeling the firm, supportive touch of a complete stranger, the floodgates of my pain broke open. The tears I had held back with such force began to roll, silent and hot, down my wrinkled face. They were tears not just for the fall, but for all the years of emotional abandonment, for all the unreturned calls, for all the times I had felt like a burden in my son's prosperous life. That young waitress, whose name I didn't even know, offered me more dignity in a single gesture than I had received from my own blood in the last 10 years. She didn't see a clumsy old lady. She saw a woman who needed help and didn't hesitate. The waitress's movement finally roused my son from his shameful paralysis. He jumped up, knocking over his champagne flute, and rushed towards me. "Mom, my God, are you okay? I'm sorry, His voice failed and he extended his perfectly manicured hand to me. There was my crossroads. Before me, two outstretched hands, my son's, soft, hesitant, stained with guilt and weakness, and that of Sophia, the young immigrant, firm, calloused, and offered with genuine compassion. I looked at Daniel's hand, the hand I held when he took his first steps, and for the first time, I felt nothing but an icy emptiness. With a clarity that frightened me, I averted my gaze from his and gripped Sophia's hand tightly. Using her support, I pulled myself up, feeling every bone in my body protest. I ignored the arm Daniel tried to place around my shoulders and leaned entirely on the young woman. The murmur in the ballroom turned to a shocked silence when, limping, I allowed Sophia to guide me away from the head table, away from the stairs, away from the life my son had chosen. As we walked towards the service door, I did not look back, but I could feel the weight of Isabella's gaze, a look of fury that I had stolen her moment of triumph, and Daniel's, a look of incomprehension and pain. But for the first time, his pain did not affect me. Something new and unshakable was growing inside me, a seed of dignity watered by the tears of humiliation. That fall had not been my end. It had been my awakening. Far from the false glamour of Beverly Hills, my life was built on the constant hum of a singer. Sewing machine in a small house in Fresno, California. The smell of machine oil, cotton fabric, and the weak coffee I drank to stay awake late into the night was the perfume of my motherhood. I was widowed when Daniel could barely walk, and my universe shrank, focusing entirely on that little being. Every dress I mended for the neighbors, every hem I sewed, every zipper I replaced turned into bread on the table, books for school, a new pair of sneakers so he wouldn't feel different from the other boys. I didn't see it as a sacrifice. I saw it as an investment of love. My hands became calloused and rough, but my heart swelled with pride with every report card of high grades, with every compliment from his teachers. I watched from the window as my son grew, dreaming of a future for him where his hands wouldn't have to bear the same scars of hard work as mine. When he was accepted into university with a scholarship, I cried for a whole week, a mixture of overwhelming joy and the first pang of loneliness. I had fulfilled my mission. I had prepared him to fly far away from me, never imagining that he would truly forget the nest. The distance began subtly. First, the weekly calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. His voice changed, acquiring a polished, impersonal tone I didn't recognize. He spoke of business terms, luxury brands, and people whose names sounded like corporations. Then, Isabella entered the scene. Daniel brought her to visit me in Fresno a single time, and the memory of that day still sends a chill down my spine. She entered my house not as a guest, but as a health inspector. Her cold blue eyes scanned every corner, every piece of old furniture, every faded photograph on the wall, and I could feel her silent judgment. She didn't ask me questions about my life or Daniel's childhood. Instead, She made comments disguised as compliments to him like, "It's incredible, darling. How far you've come from all this." She would touch me with her fingertips, as if afraid of being soiled by my reality. Daniel, eager for her approval, would laugh awkwardly and try to change the subject. I watched my son begin to transform under her influence, adopting her subtle contempt for the past. He started calling me to suggest that I modernize the house or buy more age-appropriate clothes, as if my entire life were a rough draft that he now needed to correct to present to his new world. The first public humiliation, the first one that truly cut my soul, happened during a dinner at their apartment in Los Angeles. I was invited to meet their friends, a group of young, wealthy people who talked about things I didn't understand, like investment funds and trips to the Maldives. I wore my best dress, one I had made myself, and felt like a brown sparrow among a flock of peacocks. I sat in silence, trying to be as small and invisible as possible. At one point, one of Isabella's friends, a blonde woman with a diamond necklace, turned to me with a curious smile and asked, "And you, Elena, what do you do?" Before I could open my mouth to speak of my craft, of the pride I felt in having supported my son with my honest work, Isabella intervened with a falsely sweet voice. "Daniel's mother is a true artist with a needle and thread," she said, and everyone turned to me. "She saves us all the time with little adjustments and repairs. It's such a blessing to have someone so handy for those little things, don't you think?" The comment landed on the table with the weight of an anvil. In a single sentence, she had reduced my life, my identity, to a convenient domestic service. I looked at Daniel, hoping he would say something, that he would defend the dignity of the work that paid for his education, but he just gave a weak smile and nodded, anxious for the focus to shift away from me. At that moment, at that luxurious dinner table, I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my small, humble home. The situation worsened a few years later, when the owner of the house I rented in Fresno decided to sell the property. I panicked. At my age and with my modest income, finding a new place to live was almost impossible. Seeing my desperation, Daniel, likely pressured by a sense of social obligation, offered for me to come live with them. "We have a spare guest room, Mom. You'll be more comfortable and safer with us," he said over the phone, in a voice that tried to sound caring, but reeked of reluctance. The move was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Packing up 40 years of my life into cardboard boxes felt like a rehearsal for my own death. My home, filled with memories and the smell of thread and fabric, was traded for a sterile, personality-less room at the back of their mansion, a room that was conveniently located near the kitchen and laundry area. My faithful sewing machine, my lifelong companion, was deemed noisy and old-fashioned by Isabella and banished to a damp corner of the garage under a dusty sheet. I became a ghost in my own son's house. I spent my days in silence, afraid of making noise, of getting in the way, of leaving a glass out of place. The loneliness I felt there, surrounded by a luxury that did not belong to me, was 1,000 times more painful than the loneliness I felt in my small, empty house. The second humiliation was crueler, more direct. They hosted a barbecue in the garden for the neighbors, a casual event where everyone was supposed to look happy and perfect. I was sitting in a corner, chatting with a nice lady who had asked me about my flowers. Isabella approached, sliding an arm over my shoulders in a gesture that was more possessive than affectionate. With a radiant smile for the neighbor, she said loudly, "Elena is our rock. It's such a blessing to have her with us, especially with the cost of living these days. It's one less mouth to feed in the world, isn't it?" The neighbor smiled, not understanding. Then, Isabella turned to me, lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that everyone around could hear, and added, using the Spanish term to make it sound more intimate and derogatory, "You've been so patient with us, even while being our little empata vida." The word life disruptor hung in the warm afternoon air. It was said with a smile, but the intent was as sharp as a knife. My face burned. I looked up and saw Daniel on the other side of the lawn, near the grill. Our eyes met for a second. He heard it. I know he heard it. And all he did was turn away quickly and pretend he needed to check the meat, leaving me there, branded and stripped of my dignity in front of strangers. In the months leading up to the wedding, the pressure mounted. I started to notice that my mail was being opened before it reached my hands. Conversations between Daniel and Isabella would stop abruptly as soon as I entered a room. The atmosphere was thick with secrets and resentment. The final straw was when Daniel approached me, with a folder full of papers suggesting I sign a power of attorney so he could help manage my finances. "It's just to make things easier, Mom, so you don't have to worry about bills or bureaucracy," he explained, with a rehearsed calm that didn't reach his eyes. He was talking about my small savings, the money I had saved penny by penny my entire life, my last bastion of independence. That money wasn't just a number in a bank account. It was the material proof of my sacrifices, my security, the only thing in the world that was unquestionably mine. The coldness with which he tried to take control of it frightened me. He no longer saw me as his mother, but as a problem to be managed, an asset to be controlled before it became a liability. The luxury house had turned into a gilded cage, and I was beginning to understand that if I didn't do something, they would take everything from me, down to the very last crumb of my autonomy. Feeling cornered and suspicious, I decided to put my few important documents in order. One night, while the house was quiet, I took an old shoebox from under my bed where I kept certificates, old photos, and papers from my late husband. Rummaging through those fragile pieces of my history, my fingers found a large, yellowed envelope with worn corners. It was addressed to my husband, sent many years ago to our old address in Fresno, but it had a "Return to Sender" stamp. He must have never seen it. Driven by a sudden curiosity, I carefully opened the dried seal. Inside, there wasn't a letter, but a set of legal documents with official seals and signatures. They were the deeds to a small plot of land in a rural county in Texas, a place I had never heard of. My husband, in a rare moment of financial optimism, must have bought it for a pittance and then forgotten about it. It seemed useless, a godforsaken piece of dust, but something compelled me to go to the old computer in the corner of my room. I typed the county name and the lot number into the search engine. What I discovered made my heart stop for a second, and then start beating with a force I hadn't felt in years. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from the revelation. In that time-yellowed envelope, there wasn't just a forgotten piece of land. There was a way out. There was power. And for the first time in a long time, there was a future that belonged only to me. The weeks following the wedding were the quietest, and paradoxically, the loudest of my life. On the outside, I was the picture of submission. I stayed in my room, refused Daniel's attempts at contact with polite, "I'm not feeling wells," and moved through the house like a shadow, more invisible than ever. But inside, a revolution was in full swing. The discovery of those yellowed papers didn't just give me an escape route, it gave me a backbone of steel. I spent hours on the old computer in my room, which I barely knew how to use before, researching Reeves County, Texas. I learned about oil prospecting, mineral rights, and how the land, once considered worthless, was now a coveted treasure. I made discreet calls with my heart in my throat to a lawyer and a real estate agent in the area. With every conversation, with every number they mentioned, my reality reconfigured itself. The value of that forgotten piece of land was more than I could dream of in a million lifetimes. The money, however, was secondary. What really mattered was the overwhelming sense of power it gave me, the power to choose, the power to say no. The humiliation I felt on the floor of that ballroom began to turn into fuel. Sadness gave way to a cold, sharp clarity. I was no longer the poor mother who needed her son's charity. I was a woman with resources, a woman with a future. And while Daniel and Isabella went on with their lives, believing I was in my corner, broken and defeated, I was silently building my empire from the ruins of my pain. The moment I knew would come arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Daniel knocked on my bedroom door, not with the hesitation of a repentant son, but with the impatience of a boss summoning a subordinate. He asked me to come to the living room, where Isabella was sitting on a white sofa, examining her nails as if the matter were a monumental bore. His posture was rigid, arms crossed, his face a mask of controlled irritation. He didn't begin with an apology. He began with an accusation. "Mom, we need to talk about your behavior," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "What happened at the wedding was unfortunate, but your refusal to speak with us since then is making things very difficult. Isabella's parents are asking, friends are commenting. You've created a very embarrassing social situation for us." I just stared at him, absorbing every word. He wasn't worried about my feelings, my pain, the humiliation I suffered in front of hundreds of people. He was worried about his image, about appearances, about convenience. The climax of his selfish speech was the final blow. "What I need you to do," he continued, as if giving me a work order, "is to go to Isabella and apologize. Say you weren't feeling well, that it was a misunderstanding. We need to put an end to this so we can all move on." The audacity of the request took my breath away. He wanted me to apologize to my aggressor to protect his social status. In that instant, the last thread of blind, unconditional love that tied me to him snapped. The man before me was not the boy whose knees I had patched up. He was a stranger, a hollow man, coated in success but devoid of a soul. I let him finish. I listened to every word, every justification, without a single muscle in my face moving. My silence seemed to disturb him more than any scream or cry would have. When a heavy silence filled the room, I slowly stood up. My movements were no longer those of a frail old lady. They were deliberate, filled with a newfound purpose. I went to my room and returned with the small wooden box where I kept my most precious savings. I placed it gently on the glass coffee table between him and me. I opened the lid, revealing the wads of small denomination bills, tied with rubber bands, some old coins, and my thin gold wedding ring. "This was for you, Daniel," I said, and my voice sounded firm, clear, foreign to my own ears. "It was my wedding gift. Every penny I managed to save in this life, working until my fingers bled, to ensure that your future was secure and that you had a better start than I did." I paused, looking him directly in the eyes, forcing him to see the truth of my sacrifice. But I realized, after that day, that the greatest gift I can give you now is not my money. It's my absence. Take it. Use it to fix your embarrassing social situation. Pay for the appearances that are so important to you. As of today, you are free from the burden of your old mother, from your past, from your life disruptor. With those words, I closed the box and pushed it toward him. I turned and walked out of the room without waiting for a response, leaving him there, stunned, next to the woman he had chosen and the price of his betrayal. The next morning, what I did would leave everyone speechless. We would like to feel your presence at this very moment. Please write in the comments which city you are watching us from and what time it is there now. By doing this, we create a network of energy and support for this story, a reminder that we are not alone in our battles. Every comment is a point of light in our healing process. The next morning, there were no shouts or arguments. As the sun rose over Beverly Hills, a yellow taxi pulled up in front of the mansion. I came down the stairs with a single small suitcase, the same one I had arrived with. Daniel and Isabella were in the kitchen, paralyzed, watching me as if I were an apparition. I did not give them the satisfaction of a farewell scene. I just walked to the marble table, placed the house key on the cold surface, and kept walking towards the door. The silence was my final statement. As I closed the door behind me, I felt the weight of years of humiliation finally lift from my shoulders. Inside that taxi, as the image of that luxurious, empty house shrank in the rearview mirror, I did not cry. For the first time in a long time, I took a deep breath and smelled the scent of freedom. I did not seek wealth or revenge. I sought roots. I used the money from the Texas land to buy a small, modest house in a neighborhood in San Antonio, a place that reminded me of the community and human warmth I had lost. The house was simple, but it had a small commercial space attached, with a large window facing the street. My first act was not to decorate my new home, but to find Sophia, the young waitress from the wedding. It took weeks, but I finally located her working at another restaurant. I offered her not just a job, but a partnership. I saw in her eyes the same spark of determination that had once existed in mine, and I decided that my future would not be about me, but about us. In that commercial space, we founded Threads of Hope, a small sewing school and cooperative. The sound of sewing machines once again filled my days, but this time, it was not the sound of my loneliness, but the sound of a community being woven together. I taught young women, many of them immigrants like Sophia, the art that had sustained me my entire life, giving them a tool to build their own independence. My house, once a haven of sadness, became a place of laughter, the smell of coffee and shared stories. Sophia became the daughter my heart had chosen, and the students, my granddaughters. I found a family not in the blood that betrayed me, but in the bonds of respect and mutual support we built together. News of my son came in distant echoes, through a cousin who still kept in touch. His marriage to Isabella, built on a foundation of appearances, began to crumble. The money I left him was spent. Quickly, and without my presence as the scapegoat for their frustrations, they turned on each other. The story of my humiliation at the wedding, which they had tried to suppress, spread, and the contempt they had shown for me tarnished their social image. Justice did not come with a thunderclap, but with the slow, silent emptying of their lives. They had a house full of expensive things, but they lived in an emotional desert, reaping the bitter fruits of the abandonment they had sown. I, on the other hand, had never felt so rich. My wealth was not in a bank account, but in the pride I saw in a student's eyes upon finishing her first piece of clothing. It was in the loyalty of Sophia, who now ran the cooperative by my side. It was in the peace I felt sitting on the porch of my little house at dusk, knowing that everything around me was built not on what I inherited or received, but on the value I created and shared. The opulence of Beverly Hills was a mirage, a golden, hollow shell. The real fortune was here, in this simple neighborhood, amidst the sound of machines and the warmth of community. Today, I have no luxury, but I have respect, and that no one can take from me again. Have you ever done a kind gesture that changed someone's life? Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.